بخش آخر یونیت 8 که ریفرینگ تو ناونز بود، قراره یه نمونه تست اصلی آزمون آیلتس رو کار کنیم مربوط به لیسنینگ بخش 4. میدونید که لیسنینگ 4 تا سکشن داره و سکشن 4 رو با هم دیگه قرار کار کنیم. توی بخش 4 یک نفر به عنوان گوینده داره یک لکچر، کنفرانس یا مقاله‌ای رو ارائه میده و شما باید جای خالی ها رو با استفاده از اینستراکشنی که داره کامل کنید. اینجا گفته no more than one word، یعنی فقط یک کلمه باید بنویسید. کاری که میکنید اینه که عنوان رو اول میخونید، البته یه فرصتی هم میده، 1 دقیقه بهتون فرصت میده که مطالب رو نگاش کنید. وقتی باهاشون آشنایی پیدا کردید جای خالی ها رو کامل کنید. خب من براتون پخش میکنم، لطفا با دقت گوش کنید، به سوالا جواب بدید. اون 1 دقیقه اولش رو دیگه اسکیپ میکنم که راحت‌تر از همونجا شروع کنیم.
Track 8B. You will hear part of a university lecture about the history of exercise. Before you listen, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 10.
Good morning, everyone. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at some trends that we've seen in physical fitness and exercise over the last few decades, and how popular this has become in recent years. But first, I want to start by showing just how far back formal fitness and exercise goes. In fact, this concept has a long and complex history, which I'll sum up with some key highlights. Now, I'll admit that no one can say exactly when humans began exercising in a formal, structured way, but we do have some early records. The earliest of these indicate that around 2000 BC, so that's over 4,000 years ago, the ancient Egyptians did acrobatics. And we know that for them, this was both a form of entertainment and a sport. I think we can safely assume that those who performed these acrobatics would have understood that in order to excel, they had to do some form of training. The ancient Egyptians were not the only early civilization to do this. During the same period, in China, it's believed that some people practiced a form of exercise that was a combination of breathing and fluid body movements. So, an early form of martial art. But the oldest written texts about this form of exercise are actually from India. Now, let's skip forward 1,500 years to the time of the ancient Greeks. I'll focus on 750 BC onwards, which is when the first ever Olympic Games took place. So it was in ancient Greece that we find the first formalized physical training programs, which were devised to cater for the athletes who were competing against each other. Another important difference at this time is the use of special equipment. By this I mean the use of something that was created specifically as an aid to exercise. The earliest example that we would all recognize today is the use of weights. But rather than the metal spheres we have now, the ancient Greek trainers created their version out of stone, and they made them in different sizes to give varying degrees of resistance. These athletes went to great efforts to achieve their success, and their training sessions were grueling. We also know that they used these weights not only for general resistance training, but also when running. Exercise was so important at this time that there is a relatively large amount of writing about it. This is often from famous philosophers such as Plato, one of the most widely read and studied scholars. His writing, as well as that of others, tells us how important physical fitness then was, and in fact it was seen as a key element of the ancient Greek culture. And they also recognized that physical fitness had health benefits. In fact, the famous physician Hippocrates wrote, "If we could give every individual the right amount of nourishment and exercise, we would have found the safest way to health." However, this healthy approach to exercise was not maintained. In Western Europe, during the Dark Ages, or the Middle Ages, there was almost a rejection of the idea of being physically fit. So we don't see a lot happening until the 1700s. In fact, 1760, which brings our next important milestone. Up until this point, the pursuit of fitness had largely been a solitary activity or something that was done by only a select few. But in Germany, this began to change when a school introduced fitness into their curriculum and the idea was then copied by others. This helped to turn exercise into a more social activity and also brought it to a much wider audience. And by 1799, just before the end of the century, the world's first ever private fitness club was established. This very much resembled what we would regard as a modern gym, in that it had special weighted equipment for its members to use and also provided large-scale classes. In the 1800s, this idea expanded and grew. In the 1880s, in Belgium, Leo Durlacher, who was also known as Professor Attila, established his first gym in Brussels, then a second gym in London in the late 1880s, and finally founded the School of Physical Culture in New York in 1894. So, he was a pioneer when it comes to building an international business model based solely around the idea of personal training. His personal training gyms introduced several modern-day pieces of equipment, and Attila was also one of the first proponents of using resistance training to combat the effects of aging. And in many respects, he laid a lot of the groundwork for today's gyms. So, that's a snapshot of health.
خب امیدوارم که به تمام سوالا پاسخ داده باشید. من جوابشو بهتون میگم. شماره 1 انترتینمنت، یعنی هم برای تفریح بوده هم برای ورزش. شماره 2 گفت ایندیا، این ایندیا، فقط با آیه بزرگ باید بنویسید. بعد از اون شماره 3 aimed at athletes، ورزشکاران. Number 4 special weights made of stone، سنگ. Number 5 when running، از الگوش باید استفاده کرد when doing exercises and when running. اینجا باید بدونید که ing استفاده میکنه. Number 6 an important part of، اونجا گفت as a key element of، اگه اشتباه نکنم یه بخش مهمی از culture، فرهنگ. Number 7 education system or school system، فرق نمیکنه. حالا چون school رو خیلی بهش اشاره میکرد school رو می‌نویسیم school system. Number 8 offered classes. Number 9 the first international company، بین المللی. و شماره آخر a way to fight aging، یعنی پیر شدن. هم به این صورت نوشته میشه هم به این صورت، فرقی نمیکنه، هر دوتا درسته. خب اگه سوالی چیزی بود، اگه توی هر موردی شک داشتید و سوال داشتید، حتما توی کامنت ها بپرسید. اما grammar focus task، یه سری جمله از همین ریکوردینگی که گوش کردیم در آورده، جملاتی که توش ضمایر اشاره داشت، همون demonstrative ها. ببینید this concept these that، و میگه که اینا به چه جمله‌ای برمیگرده، به چه ایده و کلماتی برمیگرده. من قبل و بعدش رو براتون پخش میکنم که راحت تر بتونیم جواب بدیم.
But first, I want to start by showing just how far back formal fitness and exercise goes. In fact, this concept has a long and complex history.
خب همونطور که دقت کردید گفت میخوایم در مورد formal fitness and exercise صحبت کنیم. پس this concept به formal fitness و exercise برمیگرده. Number 2.
Now, I'll admit that no one can say exactly when humans began exercising in a formal, structured way, but we do have some early records. The earliest of these indicate that around 2000 BC, so that's over 4,000 years ago, the ancient Egyptians did acrobatics.
The earliest of these، این these به همون records برمیگرده. پس these به early records برمیگرده. این that's هم که گفته به همون سال 2000 BC برمیگرده. خط بعدیش هم همینطوره، گفته in China during the same period، یعنی باز هم به 2000 BC اشاره داره. اما number 4.
Another important difference at this time is the use of special
this time برمیگرده به 750 BC که قبلا بهش اشاره کرد. Number 5.
Up until this point, the pursuit of fitness had largely been a solitary activity, or something that was done by only a select few. But in Germany, this began to change when a school introduced fitness into their curriculum and the idea was then copied by others.
خب گفته but in Germany this began to change. این this برمیگرده به fitness as a solitary activity اگه اشتباه نکنم که قبلش بهش اشاره کرد. در ادامه گفته when a school introduced fitness into their curriculum. School curriculum هست، این در برمیگرده به school. And the idea was then copied by others. خب ایدهش هم همون introducing fitness into a school curriculum هست. این عبارت رو کلاً به the idea تبدیل کرد. Number 6. خب قرنی که مطرح کرد قرن 17 بود. 1700s.
And by 1799, just before the end of the century, the world's first ever private fitness club was established. This very much resembled what we would regard as a modern gym.
خب this very much resembled, this برمیگرده به the world's first فکر کنم private fitness club، همچین چیزی رو گفت. پس می‌بینید که میتونیم از demonstrative ها برای جایگزین کردن ایده های قبلی به کار ببریم و جمله هامون رو قشنگ‌تر کنیم. امیدوارم که کاربردش رو خوب یاد گرفته باشید و بعداً بتونید کامل استفاده کنید. این از درس referring to nouns. هر سوالی چیزی هم داشتید میتونید توی کامنت ها بپرسید. لایک ویدیو هم فراموش نکنید. تا درس بعدی خودتون